there's still got some work to do on Masai, which is probably the one where everybody's kind of like, a little bit nervous about, because he's kind of been the catalyst of everything that's happened. I mean, we've had some not so like interesting front offices in the past. Glenn Grunwald did some good work in his day. BC, Brian Colangelo. I don't.
Yep.
I'm a Brian Colangelo lover, because that was the era where I was working for the Raptors, and I remember Brian standing around in his suits looking all good, and he just instilled confidence. But like Masai is just on a whole other level.
Yeah.
So I guess we can just talk about like the nervousness that maybe some of the fan base is feeling around Masai not being locked up yet.
Uncertainty, being a Raptors fan, again, it's hard not to see him locked up. I think it's just a formality that they are going to offer him whatever he wants to keep him around. Even if he did walk, I don't foresee a circumstance where he would leave for another team. And I know that the New York Knicks have been kind of bantered about as a destination for him, because there's a lot that he can do in New York City. But at the same time, if he did walk, I kind of see him going off on his like philanthropy, I can't even say the word, but like philanthropy efforts or whatnot. God, it's a Sunday morning we're recording this. Don't make me pronounce that again. But like his charity endeavors and his work on those fronts, like I think he would focus more of his attention there. I think, you can make the argument that he's taken this Raptors team as far as he can go. They won a championship. He made like this drastic move, getting rid of one of the franchise's top players ever in DeMar DeRozan for a shot at Kawhi Leonard. And we didn't know how that whole process was going to finish, but they won a championship. So where can this team go from there? There's going to be a lot of rebuilding over the next couple of years. We don't know where this offseason is going to take us, if Fred VanVleet's going to stick around, if Marcus Gasol's going to go to Spain, or how much money it's going to take to keep Serge Ibaka. We at least have Masai Ujiri around to kind of take care of those immediate efforts. But in terms of the long term, what is this going to team look like 5-10 years down the road? And hopefully Masai Ujiri is around for the long haul to kind of work his magic again. But for everyone on social media who's kind of like sweating over potentially losing him, I wouldn't go that far. I think he is going to stick around, and I think MLSC is going to do everything in their power to make sure he's happy. Whatever he wants, just lay it out on the table for him.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't see him leaving for another team, but it probably will be some philanthropic effort that he goes to pursue. Yeah, I was practicing it in my head the entire time. That's why I had the runway to practice it. But
exactly.
Like you said, I'm glad you mentioned it. Like he's not been afraid to make the big deal where it might ruffle some feathers in the DeMar move. So with Lowry and his big contract, and ending at the end of next season, do you foresee a world where the Raptors would actually go on and make, like, people have been talking about building a statue for the guy now, and do you foresee a world where they could possibly move him before the end of his contract, or like what do you see happening on the Lowry front?
God, well, my heart says I hope he ends up sticking around and finishing his career off as a Toronto Raptor, but at the same time, this might be the peak of his value. And I could totally foresee a circumstance where the Raptors do kind of entertain trades for him. He has 1 year left on his deal. If he's ever going to provide value to a championship contender, it's going to be, next season and the season after that, because there is going to be a drop off. I always seem to compare Kyle Lowry to Chauncey Billups, who the two have a relationship where Billups kind of peaked into like his early to late 30s, with the Detroit Pistons, and then so on and so forth. I could see Kyle Lowry, the Philadelphia 76ers need a point guard at this point. Maybe a deal could be struck with Philadelphia, but I don't think the Raptors are in a rush to move Kyle Lowry. He was probably the team's most important player during this entire postseason run, not just as a basketball player, but as a vocal leader. And if Lowry steps away, who becomes the voice in the locker room? Who's going to be the next guy to step up and be like, I'm carrying this team? Is it going to be a Fred VanVleet if they can come to a contract with him? And again, that makes re-signing VanVleet all the more important, because with Lowry's future uncertain, who's going to be your point guard of the future? VanVleet has kind of elevated himself into that spot, but Lowry is such an integral part to this franchise, and I think the Raptors are going to try and keep him around on a short-term deal, maybe just kind of keep giving him the one-year offers, paying him what he deserves at this point for everything that he's done for the organization. So, and when his career is over, his jersey is going to get retired. Maybe he'll even get a statue outside of the building, because he is the greatest Toronto Raptor of all time.
Yeah, I completely agree, and the leadership is the part that kind of like worries me the most because you're right. If he's gone, is it Van Vliet? Like, yeah, maybe, but we've seen eras in this franchise where let's say the Chris Bosh, Andrea Bargnani era where
Mhm.
there wasn't a true voice in the locker room. There wasn't that one guy. You're gonna grab somebody by the collar and say, we got to do this and we got to do it now, and that's absolutely what Lowry is. Lead by example, emotional leader. Like it's all of that. And I hope they don't move him either because like you lose that. And then you're right. It makes the Fred Van Vliet contract all the more important if
Mhm.
you eventually do end up doing that. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about as well. Like how high do you go for Fred Van Vliet? Because there are some teams out there with some money who can potentially, kind of throw a wrench into the Raptors' plans with Fred.
Well, here's the problem. I think the Raptors want to keep as much cap room available for the following summer. You know,
Yeah.
all the rumors with Giannis Antetokounmpo trying to give him a max contract, trying to bring him north of the border. So you don't want to dig into those funds too much. I think, in the 20 to $22 million range for Fred VanVleet, give him the money that he's certainly warranted for himself, but not handcuff yourself for the big payday, like the big summer with Giannis and so many big names on the open market. I think Fred VanVleet, I worry about teams like the Knicks, like the Detroit Pistons, or even like the Phoenix Suns to a lesser extent, teams that are in desperate need of a leader, desperate need of a point guard that can offer him max money. But when you're Toronto, you can say, hey, you've kind of built yourself up over time here through our farm system with the Raptors 905. You've become a championship caliber point guard. We saw how you performed against the Warriors on the big stage in the NBA Finals. We see you as an integral part of our future. And this is a winning organization. The Raptors have been one of the most consistent franchises in the league for the last decade. And to provide him that assurance, it can go a long way when you're negotiating a new contract with him. Do you really want to see yourself ending up with the Knicks, a team that's been in disarray for so long, and trying to start over from scratch with a team like that? It's not exactly alluring to a guy like Van Vliet unless they offered him, vastly more money. But I think the Raptors are going to pay him at the end of the day. But again, not to dip their toes too much into 2021.
Yeah, and I think anywhere above 20 starts to make me a little bit nervous.
Mhm.
Um, just some of the limitations. He can get to the rim, but sometimes when he gets there, and we saw it in the playoffs where he'll throw up an off balance shot off the window or something. But so it starts to make me a little bit nervous when you start to get too high, and not even too high, just into the 20s in general. So I'm hoping that they can definitely sell him on the fact that this isn't just about money. Sometimes it's about winning, and he does strike me as the type of guy where winning and being in a good situation is important. So I just hope that they don't have to do anything crazy where they're starting to dip into that 2021 money, because I would love to see Giannis here. I don't think it's going to happen. I still don't believe that we ever had Kawhi Leonard and that we won the finals.
Oh, that didn't happen. As far as it was just kind of like a passing memory. Like I still need to go back and watch some YouTube clips of all of the great moments we had during that championship run. But going back to Van Vliet, like he is, if you're going to play him off ball, if you're going to have him as your two guard, he is undersized for that position. And we saw that during the final play of Game 7, where he
Yeah.
was basically swarmed by like a Jalen Brown, and he threw up a wild shot that could have got the Raptors right back into it at the end of the game. So there are some issues that come with that, but again, Lowry isn't going to be around forever. You do need a point guard to build around for the future, and Van Vliet should be that guy.
Yeah. I agree 100%. So I mean, it still remains to be seen what's going to happen. Like, there's still a lot of uncertainty with this, with the offseason and what some other teams are going to do with the money that they have available. Because TV wise, are there going to be fans in the arena? There are so many questions, which we don't even know when the next season is going to start. So it's going to be a weird offseason.
Yeah, we don't even know what the cap is going to look like at this point. It's probably going to go down because of all the money that's been lost. So how much money can they really offer a Van Vliet at the end of the day? But I have faith in this front office. It's not the Colangelo days of old. It's the Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster era. So I'm all for that. I have faith.
Yeah. So do I. So I mean, that brings us to I guess some other areas that the Raptors need to address. I mean, you mentioned it before. Two big men who we're unsure what's going to happen in Gasol and Serge Ibaka. And then you also, like, in the playoffs, you could really see some of the limitations offensively. I know the Raptors have, over the past few years with Nurse, they've kind of tried to be a little bit more fluid offensively and not necessarily rely on, sets or like pick and rolls and the way maybe the Celtics do. Like what do you see as the number one thing that they have to address this offseason?
I mean, it's kind of what we've been talking about. I think Fred VanVleet is the number one on their priority list. To a lesser extent, Serge Ibaka. I think you can come to a cheaper deal with Serge, although I can't see teams overpaying him based on his postseason run. You're going to have some space freed up because I do think, even with these rumors kind of dissipating a bit, I don't think Marc Gasol is going to be around next year, whether he's still in the NBA or he's overseas in Spain, which I think is the more likely outcome. I just think they need to continue to shore up their depth. I think, I've seen names like Norman Powell kind of being thrown around as like a trade asset. I know that the Pacers are probably going to look to move a guy like Victor Oladipo, for example, see what kind of a package you can put together for a guy like that. But I think at the end of the day, it's just going to be like those end of bench guys that you're going to have to rehash through. I have a lot of faith in guys like Terrence Davis and Matt Thomas kind of elevating their roles next season. So I'm not worried too much on that front. A guy like Rondé Hollis Jefferson, is he going to be around next season? Probably not. I look at a guy that Raptors Twitter has seemingly fallen in love with, like a Harry Giles, for example, a big man that you can kind of rebuild, throw into your farm system and see what you can get from there. A guy with a lot of promise that really hasn't found his footing in the NBA. I think you can get him on a cheap deal and see what you can turn him into. But the Raptors core is intact. Pascal Siakam's still your guy. As sad as that postseason performance was, I think he's going to come back a lot stronger and a lot more motivated to kind of shun the doubters who turn their back on him during these playoffs. And I think you're still going to get another all-star caliber year out of Kyle Lowry. I do think Fred VanVleet's going to still be around. It's just a matter of keeping those contracts intact. Like I said, keeping Serge Ibaka around for as little money as possible, because I think he is an important part to this roster. I don't want to see the Chris Boucher era starting earlier than it has to. I don't foresee a circumstance where he's like your starting center heading into next season. So I think it's just keeping as much of the core happy and intact as possible.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a matter of kind of the way they did last offseason, getting creative with the mid level. Last year was what Stanley Johnson, Rondé. Maybe something along the lines of those. I mean, Stanley Johnson didn't really give us much. I like some of what Rondé was able to do, but you bring up Harry Giles. That's one of the names that I would definitely be interested in. I'm a Duke guy. And just the athleticism, and he hasn't had the greatest start to his career, but I think there's something there. And I think it was Blake Murphy that mentioned in an article where he was kind of throwing the name out there. Another name that I've seen is Chris Dunn, which might be interesting, but both these guys, depending on the money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really high on Chris Dunn, but again, you take a flyer on some of these guys and see what you can do. I think the Raptors are kind of building a reputation around the league of kind of turning our players' careers around. Like Rondé Hollis Jefferson kind of fell into obscurity there for a bit. He came into Toronto. I don't think he lifted himself up that much, but he had a nice stint here in Toronto as kind of like a defensive wing who is horrible around the rim. Don't get me started about him trying to score when he's 3 feet away from the bucket, but I think he does have value at the end of the day, and I think another team will bring him aboard and he'll provide value there. But the Raptors roster, it's all about they've found a lot of success over the years, just kind of moving parts in and out. Who foresaw a circumstance where Matt Thomas was going to be an important part of this roster? Who thought that Terrence Davis, another undrafted guy, was going to be making an all-rookie team at the end of the season? Like, these are guys that you can bring pretty much anyone in to fill out those like 8, 9, 10 spots and get some production out of them.
Yeah, and there's probably going to be a lot of those gems, considering that there's no NCAA tournament, that there was no NCAA tournament this past year, so a lot of teams miss out on some of those guys where they might have had a good run in the tourney, and they start popping up on teams' radar. So maybe there's going to be some of that value hidden in the draft, which, I mean, I'm not crazy about this year's draft, especially at the top end, but I mean, there's still at the low end, I think there's still some guys that they can plug in there, and given their history of player development, I think they can make something work.
Well, the Raptors just won a championship where no one on the roster was a lottery pick. So I think that just goes to show that they know what they're doing in terms of building a contender.
Yeah. And since we're talking about building teams, so I was listening to one of your old episodes, where you guys were drafting the worst Raptors players. I just want to throw out there are a couple names that you guys missed. So I'm going to throw these out. Chris Jeffries should have been on one of those lists.
Yeah, I remember Chris Jeffries. You would pick him over some of the other names that we had because we threw out some real bad players out there.
There were some real bad players, and there are a couple that I don't think should have been on that team. The other name that should have been on there, Nate Huffman, because so I like when as soon this is one of those names where like I go back all the time and I'm just like, I look at the crazy moves, and I think this was a Babcock move because he made some dumb moves during that time.
I think when we were doing that episode, I wanted to throw out some names that were bad, but that were memorably bad. I think some of the names that you're throwing out there, like a Chris Jeffries, if you were to ask 100 Raptors fans who Chris Jeffries was, I'd be surprised to hear if 10 or more people remembered his name. Like when we were throwing out like an Andrea Bargnani, who wasn't, terrible, but he was more bad than he was good as a number 1 overall pick. And then guys like Rafael Araujo, who was a lottery pick, Vincenzo Esposito, who was a name from the past that I had to bring up because I was looking at his numbers. That was a really fun podcast to do. But again, it just goes to show how bleak those times were for the Toronto Raptors and how fortunate we are to have someone who knows what they're doing in terms of taking care of this organization. And the fact that we're a champion. I'm going to be, I think I have it here with me. I got a gift, one of these replica championship rings that I keep on my desk here to remind myself that this actually happened. Oh, do you have it right there behind you?
I don't. So I actually
is that 905?
Yeah, I went to the final game. So like,
very
I picked
cool.
it up. Yeah, and then I picked. I went to the opener the following year, so I got the ring there. But since you mentioned Hoffa, just a funny story about that. So I've owned one Raptors jersey in like the last 20 years probably.
Don't tell me it was Hoffa.
No. So this is where it gets funny. So I went to Center Sports at the time and was looking at the sale jerseys because this is when they're transitioning from the purples to the reds.
Right.
So I'm looking at the rack and they got a bunch of like, they had, Lamont Murray, I think was on clearance. They had a bunch of Bosches.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at and these were authentic. So I think authentics in those days were like $150 and they were going for like $30.
Wow. Okay.
With our discount. Like we used to get that discount, like 50% off or whatever. So I'm looking at the rack and I come across a Hoffa jersey. And I look at my brother, I'm like, hey, should I do it? He's like, really? I'm like, you never know, man. Like, so it wasn't that I thought he was going to be a good player. It's just, he looked like he was like, coming across him in the arena, he seemed like a nice guy.
Yeah.
And I rooted for him. Like I was the president of the Rafael Araujo fan club.
Oh, bless your heart.
And I was looking at it. I'm like, dude, I could probably get this signed too. And like, so this ball, that's a Charlie Villanueva autographed ball.
Oh, nice.
which I got, like somebody helped me out to get it. And like, worthless probably now. Like I think the signature might devalue the ball. I feel like
it's a nice heirloom to have.
I just have it because it looks nice with the Raptors. Like I like the claw logo. So like, but I was really close to buying that jersey, and I'm so glad I didn't because that would have been a big mistake.
It would be a cool vintage look to bust out at a Raptors game once we're all allowed to go back to Scotiabank Arena. Imagine walking around the concourse with a Rafael Araujo jersey on. It's a nice conversation starter for you and other Raptors fans.
Yeah, exactly. So the two names that I didn't think should have been on there, Rafer. Come on, Rafer, man. He was the best when he was here. And the other one, Tabak. Just because like if you look at what the organization had to go through in those years, that like I was doing some research on like, kind of how the draft worked for the Grizzlies and the Raptors. And man, like they had slim pickings. Like I think it was pretty much like number 13 to 15 on the roster that they were picking from.
Well, shout out to the guys I did that podcast with, Jason Lung, my audio engineer, and Jay Rosales. I'm pretty sure those two were picked by the two of them. So
they were,
direct your blame at those guys. I wasted my picks on Eric and Aaron Williams. I couldn't believe they were still on the board. I was like, that's one of the worst trades in NBA history. We got chump change for our franchise superstar Vince Carter. So no matter what anyone says, I won that draft by picking those two alone.
I 100% agree, but no, it was a great episode. So anybody watching, just go back and listen to that, because it was really entertaining. It was kind of fun living, like every once in a while, I'll go back and on Basketball Reference and just look at some of the rosters that we had, and like brutal, some brutal
Shield
teams.
your eyes. Some of those rosters should have age restrictions on them, because only the oldest, gentlest of eyes should be able to look at them, because those teams were really bad. But thank you for the kind words. And again, I'm happy we had Kawhi Leonard. I'm happy we have Kyle Lowry. We have a lot of good players now. Let's not return to those days.
Yeah, the days where we were celebrating the Atlantic Division, which
hanging those banners in the arena. Yeah, God, I'm glad those days are over.
I'm pretty sure I was present when that was happening. And we were